Well, hello everybody. I'm going to wait just a little bit because I had originally scheduled the stream to start earlier, but I had some commitments, so I had to end up starting it later. So I will wait a little bit and then I will get started. Thanks for coming to join wherever you are in whatever time zone you are in to learn a little bit more about what's going to be happening to the channel. I think we'll wait. I think we will just wait one more minute because I had delayed it by 15 minutes. So I have a number of meetings today. So even though it's a Saturday for me, there's a lot of different responsibilities I've got to do my best to pull off. All right. So it's 4:45 where I am, and I'm gonna start talking about the channel. So how did the channel start originally? It actually started in December of 2020, and I had just finished a year in which I'd read more books than I had read in many years. I'm not saying ever. I just don't know. I wasn't really keeping track, but I'm on the Goodreads app and I keep track of books and I put notes in there. And that year I had read so many books. And so often I was sharing ideas with people and I would say, "Oh, I read this book and here's the reasons you should read it. And here's a great idea I got from it. Or here's a really interesting fact that I learned." And I was doing this all the time. And at some point, I thought, well, I could potentially just share these ideas online on YouTube. And I didn't have any ideas of anything fancy. So if you go back to the earliest videos, it is low tech. And I'm not pretending this is high tech at the moment, but it was low tech. So audio quality, video quality. When I'm holding up books, you'd see the title would be backwards because I hadn't uh, done the mirror flip. So when I was holding up a book, it would show backwards, and I didn't even know that I was doing that. I was just I was reading a book. I had some ideas about it. I would jot it down. I would put those ideas up here, and then I would push record. I would talk into the camera. I'd share those ideas, and then I'd hit stop. And that was pretty much it. And I did that for years. So starting in December 2020 until October 2023, I would record 1 to 2 videos per month on various books, nonfiction, fiction, classical stuff, modern stuff. It's really quite varied if you go back and you look at the catalog. When October the 7th happened, I I couldn't believe all the nonsense I was hearing, right? About everything. And even then, even though there wasn't the documentation that's been put out by The Intercept and Electronic Intifada, and a lot of the journalists hadn't, there was enough information and enough craziness for me to know that no babies had been put in ovens, no babies had been beheaded. This whole narrative that was being put forward by the IDF was a lie. I knew it. And as I didn't know it then because I hadn't done enough reading. Often, whatever the IDF accuses someone of, it's projection. They do it. So if they're accusing someone of rapes, it means that they're raping. If they're accusing someone of child torture, it means they're child torturing. Whatever they accuse you of, they do 10 times more. I didn't know that at the time. But if you go back and you look at that October, I released that video on October the 14th on the ethnic cleansing in Palestine. This was the book that started it all. And I released that on October the 14th. And I said in that video, I said, if you believe that babies were put in ovens and they were beheaded and there were mass rapes, you also believe that Assad gassed his own people, and you believe that uh, Saddam Hussein killed babies in incubators and all the other things that are put out to us by the Western media. Believe this, Arabs are bad, and that's why they all need to be killed. It's all part of the same narrative. And it doesn't mean that every news story has to be questioned, but it means that every news story needs to be at least critically examined, especially if it's coming out about the Middle East. What is the political agenda? And so I uploaded that video and I went to bed. Okay. And I didn't really think much of it because my channel was a little channel. I think I had, I don't know, uh, however many, let's say 200, 300, maybe 300 subscribers. I had 300 subscribers, I think, on October the 14th. And when I woke up, my channel had exploded. Right, I had shot past. I think I was at 2,000 subscribers the morning when I woke up, and I was in a universe of comments. And prior to that, I would be excited or happy if one person commented on a video like once a month, because I was reviewing things that perhaps people weren't that interested in, or if they were interested in, other people did very well. So, for example, I've done a review of Pride and Prejudice, but there are some other really great reviews that are, an hour long, and the person gets dressed up in clothes and does voices, and I can't compete with that. That's not my lane. My lane is to talk about ideas and the book and to put that forward. And I was still doing that when I did the ethnic cleansing in Palestine. I did that somewhat again the following week when I did the Israel lobby. So when I saw this idea of there's a narrative being put out about Israel and there's a narrative being put out about the Palestinians, I thought, I just went to Palestine this last summer. I had a chance to speak to Palestinians. I had a chance to see the apartheid and the segregation myself. I am not going to allow this narrative to continue. And so I picked three books to talk about. And the first was The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine by Ilan Pappé. And the second was The Israel Lobby by John Mearsheimer and Stephen M. Wald. And the third was Peace in the Promised Land, which was by a number of authors, which were talking about, well, what does it mean to even move towards a quote unquote peace process? And I thought I would leave it. I thought, okay, well, I've made my contribution to this discussion, and that's that. And all the time, that ethnic cleansing video was climbing through the charts. And I was having to deal with a lot of comments. And one of the most frequent comments I heard was Benny Morris, Benny Morris, Benny Morris, Benny Morris. And Ilan Pappé's been discredited, etc. And Ilan Pappé makes up things, and he admits that he makes up things. And I didn't really know where all the criticisms were. I didn't realize the history behind the ethnic cleansing of Palestine's release and how it basically got Ilan Pappé canceled in Israel. You can't tell people that without them being really upset. And so he had to be canceled and exiled out of Israel. And I didn't know that. And at the time, Benny Morris, Benny Morris, Benny Morris, Benny Morris. And I didn't know at the time that Benny Morris, in many ways, does not factually disagree with Ilan Pappé. They have different worldviews and they have different solutions. But the idea that 300,000 Palestinians, let's say 250, I think Pape says 250 plus 60, I think, prior to May 15th. And I think Morris gives around 300. There is no disagreement between Betty Morris and Alan Pape on how many people were ethnically cleansed out of the 1947 Jewish state partition lines before Israel declared independence, before any of the 6 Arab armies invaded and were going to push us into the ocean. That what happened was Israel conducted an ethnic cleansing operation prior to its declaration of independence. That is a fact. That is not questionable. That's simply facts. And anyone who disagrees with that is just not being honest. They haven't read any history. I didn't know that at the time. I hadn't read any Benny Morris. I hadn't read any Avi Schleim. I hadn't read any Rashid Khalidi. And I was so irritated by the comments from people saying, oh, well, if you just read this book, you'll realize that you're just being lied to. And I thought the book that I'd read by Ilan Pappé accorded with my experience in Palestine. When I talked to people and I asked them, I said, did this really happen? And the exchanges I had when I was in Hebron, and I was in the settlement. I was in the Jewish settlement in Hebron, and I was on the Palestinian side. And I got to speak to both the Jewish settlers and the Palestinians in Hebron living segregated lives. That's a rare privilege. I got to go into both the Ibrahimini Mosque and into the synagogue that's situated on the same site, which I think since recently, the Muslims have not been allowed to go into that building. But the reality that I experienced accorded with what I read from Ilan Pappé. And I was really irritated that people thought, well, if you just read Betty Morris, you'll realize it's not true. So I've read 2,000 pages of Betty Morris since then. And there is no substantial disagreement about what happened. Now, Morris is going to tell you it happened for different reasons, but his numbers do not differ substantially. And as we know, he's a complicated figure, someone who refused to serve in the occupied territories, but also says that the ethnic cleansing didn't go far enough. And so I thought, okay, I did these 3 books and I said my piece. I'm not an Arabist. I don't speak Arabic. Um, And this channel, I'm not equipped to deal with this. But the views just kept going up. And I thought, okay, well, what is the market telling me? And this is something classic, having owned businesses in my life and having told people I've mentored in business over and over. Listen to what the market is telling you. Don't listen to what you think. If you think this will be a good idea, but no one likes it, quote unquote, no one likes it, but everyone likes something else, you should, if it aligns with what you believe in, follow that. Right. So if you wanted to open up a coffee shop and everyone is interested in bubble tea and you don't want to do bubble tea, okay, close down your coffee shop. But if you like bubble tea and you're open to doing bubble tea, then do it. And so for me, I was open to reading more about Israel and Palestine. I just didn't know if I was the right person for it. But the views kept coming, and at that point, my channel got monetized. So if you people don't know, what it takes to monetize a channel is 1,000 subscribers plus 4,000 hours of watched video. Keep in mind, I'd had the channel since December of 2020. So all of 2021, all of 2022, and all of 2023 up till October hadn't mattered. I wasn't anywhere close to the channel being monetized because we were talking about tens of views and hundreds of views. At that point, I think even my most popular review at the time on the Camp of the Saints was something like 2,000 views all time. And if you look at my video on ethnic cleansing of Palestine, it's north of 160,000 views now. The Israel lobby one is 30,000 views. And so my channel got monetized from that video. And I thought, okay, well, I can maybe talk to people about this and I can basically share my journey with people about learning because I really learned more when I went to Palestine. Up to that point, I had learned about it through interviews. I knew that the situation was not just. I'd known that for many years, but I didn't know why. I just knew what had happened generally was unjust. But I wasn't an activist. I wasn't militant about it. I just thought this is bad. And then, as I said, going to Palestine will change you if you go. If you go to the West Bank, if you go, as I did, down to the Erez crossing, and I talked to Palestinians who would come in through the border with Gaza, I learned what it takes to permeate. I tried to apply to go into Gaza. I got resistance from the State Department of the US. I got resistance from everybody, and they have to vet you. And if you have any opinions about Israel, you're not going to get into Gaza. It's very different from 2000, even prior to 2006, where journalists or people could go into Gaza and report on things. Israel doesn't really allow that anymore. So there's basically three people you have to get through if you want to get into Gaza. You have to have the Israeli sign off on you. You have to have the Palestinian Authority sign off on you, and you have to have Hamas sign off on you. And if you have any opinions out there, you better believe those are going to get checked. So I wasn't able to get into Gaza, but I got to speak to people right outside the Erez crossing about what their life was like, what they thought about the occupation, what it felt like to work in Israel. And as I've said, on more than one occasion, the sentiment expressed to me was we build the settlements in the morning and we complain about them in the afternoon. This sort of very difficult economic choice that they have to make, that I have to work for the people who are oppressing me so I can feed my family. I cannot imagine what that is like, but I heard people tell me that. And so I thought, okay, I'm not necessarily the best person for this, but I am going to do my best to enunciate. So I ordered 60 books on Palestine and Israel from very different um, genres. So whether that was memoir or history, I needed to start with the history first. And if you look at the direction of the channel after October 7th of last year, you'll note it's very front loaded with history. So Rashid Khalidi's Iron Cage was something that I read after. And then One Palestine Complete by Tom Segev, which really explains what was Palestine like prior to 1948. What was the situation? What was going on with the British? What was going on with the Palestinians? What was going on with the Jews? And that book is foundational. You have to read that book. And so then, okay, what was the next big event? Well, 1948 is the next big event. And after 1948, well, 1967. And I was just trying to piece that all together. And I had put all the books out. And I thought, I have to read this in a certain order. And while I'm doing it, I wanted to make sure different stories were being told. So at some point, I took a diversion and I said, I want you to hear from Palestinians telling their stories. And strangely enough, people were not interested. If you look at views of the channel and you look at views of certain videos, the marketplace is telling you what they're interested in, right? And for whatever reason, People are only really interested up until recently, I would say up until the last month, people have only been really interested in the superstars. So if there's a book by Ilan Pape and Noam Chomsky, that gets a lot of views. But Amira Haas, who I consider a wonderful journalist who went and lived in Gaza for many years, people are not interested. Drinking the Sea at Gaza, I did a two video review on that. People not that interested in it. These are people who are interested in the channel and interested in what I'm covering, but over time the views have not indicated that or that. Same thing, highlighting only recently has Hassan Kanafani's review started to rise a little bit, but Murid Al Barghuti's, I saw Ramallah, beautiful text. People were not that interested. And Rafet Al Arir's text highlighting young Gazan students talking about being part, some of them who are probably dead now. Rafat Al Arir was assassinated by the IDF in December of last year. And that people were not interested in that. So I'm not saying people need to be interested in everything I'm interested in. It's just that you have to realize part of the calculus for me is looking at what are people interested in and what are the stories that I'm going to tell. And I had to make a decision, I think, as October the 7th of this year was coming, as a 1 year anniversary of my channel changing direction, was am I going to make this channel permanently about Palestine and Israel, or am I going to make a change? And so that's when the idea of Palestine Bookshelf came together. And I thought, well, no, I want to continue talking about this, but that isn't only the only thing I'm interested in. It is something that is really important to me and something that I feel cannot get enough attention. But there are still other things that I want to talk about. And it doesn't matter to me whether they get views or not. I never got into this discussion, sharing about books in order to get views. I never had this notion I was going to be a YouTuber. But I want to continue that. And so Palestine Bookshelf will launch on October the 7th. If you've been following my channel, I've been giving you links and putting shorts in there and just getting the channel ready to launch. But that channel will launch, and part of that will be recapitulating, going back to all those books, going back to this and doing a different type of review when I know much more now. I mean, I've read 40 books since I did this review. So I know a lot more. I bring a lot more to the table. I've read 39 books since I did this review. So I am more equipped to talk about them, and that channel can be launched with those books and potentially start the journey for people who have maybe just joined the channel in the last month or two. So that's what's going on. October the 7th, I'm going to switch over Palestine and Israel comments and videos and stories and books to Palestine Bookshelf, so that my goal is once a week to put out a new review on something that belongs on your Palestine bookshelf. That's my idea. This channel, I think, for a while is going to accompany that. All right, so I'll preview for you. I don't normally do this, but you all came to the stream, so I want to share it with you. So here's one: 51 documents Zionist collaboration with the Nazis. Boy, this is a cancelable book. I'm going to get canceled for reviewing this book. But there it is. The documentation is available. That is not necessarily a Palestine bookshelf book. It could be, but it's more about this particular collaboration, and maybe I will do a review for it on Palestine Bookshelf at some point. But in the beginning, as the channel starts to decouple and I find out what the new direction is for the Stephen Heiner channel, and I would say I have some clue, is I'm going to do books that are not as well represented or not as well known, that I think are vital for people to know about, because it follows the same line of Palestine Bookshelf, which is these are books that you're not supposed to read, because if you read it and you know about it, then you possess forbidden information that the Zionist state would not allow you to know, or it would be you'd be denied or you'd get into a lot of trouble for saying it. And I want to do that with the main channel, but I don't only want to do controversial books. So I say controversial or lesser known. So great novels that I think people don't know about that I would like to share. Some, this is what you could say Stephen's bookshelf. These are the books that have really, really mattered to me in my life, that have made me change my behavior or my way of thinking in some way. And those are books I want to share with people. So I can do both. Now, it's going to be a lot more work, but to do 2 YouTube channels and try to do weekly videos, uh, but we'll see how I do. Okay, so give me 90 days to pull it off, and we'll have a conversation again in 90 days. But that's what I'm going to try to do starting October the 7th. So I'm going to need your help with that. So when the channel launches, I'm hoping that you will be able to share it on your social networks and potentially monetize Palestine Bookshelf sooner rather than later so that it can be generating income, which can allow it. I have, you may not realize this, but I don't do my thumbnails. I'm not a graphic designer. I don't do my shorts. I have people who do that. I pay them for that. And partially it's paid for out of the advertising revenue, but mostly it's been out of my own pocket because, as you know, this topic is not popular for YouTube. And most advertisers do not want to advertise about their happy product next to people are being ethnically cleansed out of their country and murdered. You don't then run a happy advertising. Why don't you buy my product? So this isn't a channel that will be monetized in that way. It's going to be monetized through contributions, through donations, other things. And so I'm setting up a website for that. There'll be more as we get up towards October the 7th. I'm going to give more information, but I really want to encourage you, if you're interested in Palestine and Israel and learning more, I'm not giving that up. I'm just moving that to a separate channel that's going to exclusively focus on that with 100% focus to the exclusion of everything else. And this channel will help it. It has a bigger reach as of right now. I think Palestine Bookshelf has 26 subscribers, and this channel is moving slowly towards 7,000. So I'll be able to try to send some traffic over there in the beginning, but that also depends on you. If you're taking the time to watch this live stream or you're watching it later, please consider going over there, sharing it with people and across different social media channels. So I know people, they're not necessarily on every social media channel, but I've tried to capture as many different social media channels so I can reach people wherever they are, whether they're on Instagram or Threads or whatever else. Those of you who might have gone on to my own private Instagram, you'll notice it's been inactive for some time. I haven't posted on there since 2023 for various reasons, which I can talk about some other time. But I'm really only active as Steven on X and on YouTube. But Palestine Bookshelf is going to be active everywhere on Telegram and Threads and Instagram and Facebook and wherever else. And we're going to try to meet people where they are and talk to them about this. So I hope that you'll join me. And some of you who came for Palestine, I hope that you stay for other things. So let me come into the chat, see what's going on. Z Unknown. Keep doing your insightful work, Stephen. You reawaken my joy of reading historical literature. I've begun putting away my phone for YouTube-based content, and I'm reading books. That's wonderful. Happy to hear that. Thank God you changed your direction. Well, thank you, Jamie. Israel stole uranium from the U.S. to start their nuclear arsenal. It wasn't just uranium they stole. They stole the secrets of how to build it. They are not an ally. Yes, that's true. That is a cancelable book. For those who are coming later to the chat, this was the cancelable book, 51 Documents, Zionist Collaboration with the Nazis. That is not a book that people are going to like. Are you going to read literature or religious books here? Well, I've read literature and religious books here before. I think one of the religious books I talked about was The Desert Fathers. It was written by the monks. Not written by the monks, their collection, actually a very limited collection of some of the writings of the Desert Fathers. I've done that. Wasn't very popular. And literature, I've done that as well, but as I say, not very popular. I never did this, let's say, to become a YouTuber. I just wanted to share books that I was reading with friends. As I said, 2020 was, I'd never read as many books that I can remember. And then 2021, I read even more. So can we get Amira Haas on for an interview? Do you know, if you look, she hasn't recently, if you look at for interviews of her on YouTube, she hasn't done any interviews that have come on recently. So a lot of the interviews that because I was doing research before I did the video on her and I wanted to see if there were other facts that would be helpful. And one of the videos that I did my research on, the video was 12 years old. So there are other outlets who do that. So Middle East Eye, Electronic Intifada, Owen Jones. There are lots of people who have interviews on. I don't think that's where I can add value. Not only am I not a full-time journalist, this is part-time, this is whatever you want to call it, a side hustle, something I do as a passion project. So I don't know that that's really valuable for me to interview. I'm not ruling it out, but I see where my value is reading books and talking about books and sharing those ideas. It went over my head that Palestine Bookshelf was YouTube channel. Just subscribed. Okay, thank you. Palestine Bookshelf is a great name for your other channel. Just subscribe. Thank you, Zain. It's obviously incorrect in that it's what kind of bookshelf is it? It's a Palestinian bookshelf. But I just thought the idea of, in English, putting those two nouns next to each other, Palestine and bookshelf, there's sort of an idea of place there as well, right? Palestine is a place, a bookshelf is a place, and trying to, in a sense, make Palestine a place through talking about it, right? So they're struggling to become a nation state, even in the eyes of a very hypocritical world. And if one place that Palestine can be a place is our bookshelf, then at least we can do that, and we can claim that space for Palestine. And we can claim that space not through necessarily political action. I'm not discouraging that, but through the conquering of your mind, conquering the political biases that you've grown up with, conquering the Zionist Hasbra lies that we've been given, and the faulty thinking, understanding what does it mean to be an Arab? What does it mean to be a Christian? What does it mean to be a Jew? What does it mean to be a Zionist? What does it mean to be a settler colonialist? As I talked about recently in my stream, what does it mean to be Lebanon? That's a complicated question. And we say that as men, women, and children are being indiscriminately bombed by a criminal entity known as Israel. And the world stands by and lets it happen. And part of doing this channel and part of talking about these books is answering the question, why do we let this happen? Why is it that we let Israel do whatever it wants? And part of that has to come from understanding how Israel was founded, the relationship of Zionism to Judaism, the relationship of Judaism to the world, and something that has come up recently that people have been contentious about, my refusal to think it's a really important thing to parse between Zionism and Judaism. Like, oh, well, Stephen, the war is with the Zionists, not with the Jews. And I've said, and I'm going to continue to say, there are plenty of Jews who would not consider themselves Zionists, but consider themselves unconditionally supportive of Israel. There are Jews, there are people who comment in the section. I'm not saying you are not against it, but your numbers are small. Statistically speaking, and in every way, your numbers are small. Most support the actions of the criminal entity, either through inaction or by agreeing. When we watched recently a bunch of Israelis go and pound on the doors of a jail to break out rapists, do you think all of those people were crazed individuals? Some of them teach school children. Some of them are police officers. Some of them pick up garbage. Well, no, that's Israelis would never do that. That's not a job that they would have anything to do with. But whatever it is, they're quote unquote normal people. And I would pass them on the street in Jerusalem. I remember I might have shared this before, but I happened to be in Jerusalem on what is known as Jerusalem Day. And this was when the Zionists, the Jews, will celebrate the quote unquote retaking of Jerusalem in 1967. And I promise you that it was militant. It was militant at every age and every level. These were a generation of people who grew up in charge, privileged, and think that the Palestinians are total trash. As a tourist, I can somewhat freely move between restricted areas in the city, but there's different streets that are exclusively Muslim, and I had accidentally gone into this, and they were they could tell, right, this does not look like a Muslim or an Arab face. And they said, oh, you're one of them who spoke some English, said, you're not supposed to be here. And I was there on Jerusalem Day, and there were a bunch of, let's say, 14, 15, 16-year-old Israeli kids singing songs in Hebrew, which I knew were not nice songs. I don't understand Hebrew, but the way they were singing and the fact that the police were in front of that market, blocking them out and yelling at them. Keep in mind, these are there's a different police force inside Jerusalem. This isn't the IDF necessarily. They are IDF at different checkpoints, but they were yelling at the kids to stop. And then the kids would come in and yell from another entrance. And they were just there to taunt the Palestinians. And I watched all the Palestinians just, they're not going to say a word. They know that any kind of response will lead to them getting beaten, kicked, etc. And Jerusalem is an entirely different issue from being out in Hebron or being out in Bethlehem or Nazareth or any of the other places I watch Palestinians interact with the IDF. But in Jerusalem, it's powder keg. And so I just watched that behavior. And that was me watching in real time what I've learned about when I've read in the books. But I didn't know that at the time I read the books. All those experiences came later to me when I read the book. And I thought, oh, that's validated by my life experience. But at the time I was going through that life experience, I didn't know that. I had no idea. So that anger at that injustice has only grown since that time, in part because of just it's so inspiring to be around the Palestinians who are um, friendly and smiling despite the horror around them. When I was there, I didn't know what they were really going through. I was only starting to learn. But now that I know and continuing to learn and continue to know, I'm only more inspired by them. What they're willing to do, what they're willing to sacrifice, it's really inspiring. So, um, let's read some other chats. Thank you for your dedication. It really helps navigate through Palestinian history. Thank you. There's a 3-hour interview with Rudolf Verba, who escaped from Auschwitz. Listen to it, shocking stuff he reveals. Palestinians removed by the Nakba were actually descendants of the original Israelites. Interesting that Bolsheviks are now in control there. Yeah, Ron. I mean, that's something else that hopefully Palestine Bookshelf will talk about. Propaganda is a dangerous drug. Matt, thank you. Well, thank you. In your opinion, what 3 books would you recommend to a newcomer to learn about Palestine, Israel? Obviously, this answer has changed for me over time because I I've learned more. But from the Palestinian side, I would say the best one volume would be The 100 Years' War on Palestine by Rashid Khalidi. So I think that is going to give you a comprehensive timeline view from the Palestinian perspective from a Palestinian. So 100 Years' War on Palestine by Rashid Khalidi. That's book number 1. Book number 2, I've already mentioned today. Um, One Palestine Complete by Tom Segev. So that gives you the idea of how did the British Mandate of Palestine come about? Why was it unjust to the Palestinians? Why was it tilted towards the Israelis? And keep in mind, Tom Segev is an Israeli Jew, but he's an honest one who's interested in telling real history. And you read that book and you'll see how unjust the mandate was in its existence, not just in its creation, but in the way it was administered and how the British totally botched it. So, British Mandate of Palestine gets you up to 1948, and Rashid Khalidi's 100 Years' War, I think the first attack he says is 1917, right, with the Balfour Declaration. So that will take you up through 2012, I think, is when that book was published. So 1917 to 2012, that'll give you that. Then what would be the third book? Wow, this is really hard, especially because I'm reading I'm reading this right now. 1967 by Tom Segev. And I mean, I mean, 1967, people don't realize it is what has set us up for now because it was the completion of what wasn't finished in 1948. So I think prior to reading this book, I was really, really focused on 1948. And I can't change that. But I would really argue probably that third book, whether people are going to like it or not, is going to be Benny Morris. And it's going to be the birth of the Palestinian refugee problem revisited. The reason I'm going to give you that is because he documents, as I talked about in my reviews of that book, I think I did 2 reviews, how each wave of expulsion happened. Prior to May 15th, 1948, from May 15th, 1948 to the armistice, to the ceasefire, and then from the ceasefire to the peace negotiations in 1949. It's 600 pages. And at the time when I originally ordered it, I had to order it from another country. It wasn't available. I think none of the books about this era were really ready for October the 7th because the interest in the issue skyrocketed. So people were able to see on social media, people are being murdered. I'm tired of just listening to the media tell me it's an endless problem. Jews and Arabs hate each other. There's no solving this. And a lot of people said, you know what? I'm actually going to go look this up for myself. They started reading books, and that's where they got to. So I guess I can type that in the chat. Rashid Khalidi, 100 Years War on Palestine. Then Tom Segev, One Palestine Complete. And then Benny Morris, The Birth of the Palestinian Refugee Problem Revisited. And I think Morris is what I take the most joy in quoting to Zionists, is because they are unlikely to have read any Benny Morris. They're going to go look up a Wikipedia entry or they're going to Google something and they're going to read some quote from Benny Morris doing a television or radio interview about how much he doesn't like Ilan Pape, but they will never have read his books. And so when I'm able to quote Benny Morris to a Zionist and hear nothing in response, that's very satisfying. Because they're the ones who told me, go read Benny Morris, go read Benny Morris, go read Benny Morris. And that's only because they were told by someone else to quote Benny Morris because he's a Zionist. But they didn't realize Benny Morris actually did real history and he substantiated the claims of everyone else. So does Tom Segev. He just didn't get canceled. He didn't write about this, right? But his conclusions, and I'm not finished with the book yet, but his conclusions are nearly as damning as they were in One Palestine Complete. He just didn't use a label that got him canceled. And again, Pape is more of an activist. He would say that too. He's an activist historian, and that's different from trying to maintain this image. And so people would attack in the comments as well. So, oh, well, you pretend to be objective. And I've always said, anyone who spends more than 5 minutes looking into this is not going to be objective. We will see where most of the blame has come from. Overwhelming. We're talking 90 to 95% versus the 50-50 narrative. Like, oh, both sides, blah, 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 blah. So it's not about both sides. If you've taken 5 minutes to research this, you would not say both sides. That's crazy. There's not a both sides here. There is an evildoer and a victim. That's the two sides that are here. And if you take the time to look at it and research it, you'll find that out. So, as I say, the channel is going to change. So today I'm recording this at September the 28th. So on October the 7th, I will release the first video for Palestine Bookshelf. And I hope that you'll subscribe to the channel and consider promoting it and sharing it with other people. And there'll be lots of different ways that we can promote that channel. And the Stephen Heiner channel will continue to try to support it in some ways with some supportive, but it will also veer off and do some different books and different topics. And part of that is simply just, I have continued to read other books. I know that sounds crazy. I'm, reading probably a couple books a week on Palestine, but I'm still reading other books as well. And part of that is just who I am as a person and wanting to share that as well. So I'm not trying to say that Palestine is not important. And I'm not trying to say that it's not a part of my life. It's so much a part of my life. I've started another YouTube channel. So I'm going to make it a full-time YouTube dedication, but I still have work I do. I still have other things in my life, and I still have other books that I read. So I want that to complement and try to highlight some other issues of injustice that I've known about, but I haven't done book reviews about in the past. One of them, I think I was sharing with some of you in the comments about Lakota Nation versus the United States, and which is a wonderful documentary about the Sioux and the fact that they've won a Supreme Court case in the United States about the treaty that the U.S. broke, in which they said, as we know, every treaty with the Native Americans that the U.S. has ever made, they've broken. So the treaty says this is the land of the Sioux forever, and then gold gets discovered in the Black Hills, and turns out forever was 2 years. And the Supreme Court ruling says that the Sioux are owed this land, but in the United States, a Supreme Court decision has to be backed up by an executive decision. So the same thing happened. Andrew Jackson was ruled against by the Supreme Court when he was deporting the Cherokee from Florida to Oklahoma. And Andrew Jackson famously said, the Supreme Court has made its decision, now let it enforce it. So if the executive branch doesn't want to enforce a Supreme Court ruling, it doesn't have to. And so with the Sioux Nation, who have won a Supreme Court case saying that that treaty is valid and it should be enforced, continue to have their land taken from them. And there are all sorts of injustices that need to be discussed and highlighted and shared, not because we quote unquote need to care about everything. That's not the issue. People's hearts are only so big. The human heart is limited. We can give our devotion and our time to only so many things. It's not an infinite. We don't have infinite time. We don't have infinite heart space. But I do want to highlight certain things and allow people to then choose, oh, that sounds interesting. I'd like to learn more about that. That's always been my joy of sharing books, is not that I think everyone is going to like every book that I recommend. As I shared earlier in the stream, there are plenty of books that I've done on Palestine that no one cares about, as far as the views indicate. When you have 196 views for a video I did 7 months ago, which highlights what the tortures that were happening to the Palestinians, and people aren't interested in it, but they'd rather listen to, this particular name brand author on the Palestine issue. It just highlights, well, there are things that people are interested in, and that's okay. I'm trying not to be attached to that, because that's a sort of larger issue for me in life. Is I try not to be attached to outcomes. I try to be attached to inputs. I'm responsible for what I put in. God is responsible for what comes out, right? I don't control what comes out. And so I can only control what I put in, and I'm going to put in 100% whenever I can into anything that I really care about. If you don't put in 100%, then you don't really care. This is something else I've shared with people. When they say, I don't have time for blank, okay? If they're your friend and you can share this with them without it sounding offensive, say, could you rephrase that as, it's not a priority for me to blank, right? So, for example, someone says, I don't have time to work out. And you say, so what you're saying is it's not a priority for you to work out. And then people can get uncomfortable with that or not. If they're not uncomfortable, say, yeah, you're right. You know what? It's not important for me to work out. Great. Now you've recognized it. It's not a question of time, it's a question of priorities. So if someone says, I don't have time for X, just gently challenge them and say, it's not a question of time, it's a question of priorities. Rephrase it and say out loud, I don't have time. So, I'm too busy to call my mom. It's not a priority for me to call my mom. How does that feel? And if it doesn't feel good, make a change. And if it feels fine, then it's correct. But don't say you don't have time. We all have time. The richest people and the poorest people have the same hours in the day. They have different things that they have to do. The poorest people have to spend that time getting water, clothing, food, surviving, but they have the same access to the same number of hours. It's a question of how they use those hours. Um, in the chat, the Bolsheviks are really focused on the ancient bunting map or Greater Israel. General Wesley Clark gave us a hit with his comment on TV7, 7 countries in 5 years, Belt and Road Initiative. Ron, excellent point. And you can find those videos. And if you look at the map for Greater Israel, when they say river to the sea, they're talking about the Euphrates River. They're talking about all of it. They want all of it. They would never say it out loud, but ask Israelis, why is it that the borders of Israel are not fixed? Because they always want more. They want more land. They want it all. The idea that, and they've gotten Trump to repeat this idea: Israel's too small. How can Israel get more land? And just, you ask people. He said Trump is asking how Israel can get more land. Israel has been consuming land since the beginning. That's all they do. They take over other people's land. Can you please end your videos with a call to action for BDS and the No Thanks app? Bill, I will definitely look into that. I am in general agreement with BDS. I think I probably struggle a bit with not at all visiting Israel, because that's the only way I can get into Palestine. And if I follow, let's say, extreme enforcement of BDS, that would mean I would boycott even going into Israel, which would mean I couldn't visit Palestine. And so I'm not, let's say, 100% aligned with BDS, but I would argue I'm at least 90% aligned with BDS. And I think I've started to add that to work I've done for clients, that I will not do any client work for anything that has anything to do with supporting the settlements or the Israeli occupation. So thank you for highlighting that. Please give me a chance to look that up. I'll just make a note to myself. No thanks. Okay. Thank you for the question, for recommendations. Yes, Palestine bookshelf is a great idea. Thank you. Israel controls the US for a very long time now. Yeah. I talked about that in Alison Weir's book, and that got a lot of views. So if you look at the channel, the highest ranking video for the channel on Palestine Israel is The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine by Ilan Pape. The second is The Israel Lobby by John Mearsheimer and Stephen M. Walt at about, as I said, about 30,000 views. And then recently, Alison Weir's Hidden History Against Our Better Judgment, something moving towards 20,000 views. Now, keep in mind, the Israel Lobby has had almost a year to get 30,000 views and all of the attention that's been focused on it. And this Alison Weir book has only been up for a month, and it's coming up on 20,000 views. So it just shows you the interest is only accelerating. I don't think most people are going to find my channel and say, oh, I've got to go back and watch every video Stephen has done. I've done that myself with some creators, where there's There's a creator right now who I'm really interested in. Her name's Ash. She lives in Florida, but she has a channel called Coffee and Cults. But she goes in and does these deep investigations on scams and scam artists, and I find her work inspiring and fascinating. But I'll go back and I'll watch her old videos. I think I watched a video from hers yesterday that's 10 months old, but was about the Monopoly game scam at McDonald's and how the scam worked and who the people involved were. So I that's unusual. I don't think most people find a creator and are so interested in the creator that they go back and watch everything. So there's a sort of recency bias where people come to the channel and they're likely to watch the videos that are most recent. So part of that halo effect has been around the recent books. I was very surprised that Jeff Halper's book got the views that it did. So I think it's pushing 7,000, maybe 8,000 views. I have to check. But that book about one democratic state and breaking down what the idea of settler colonialism was, I thought was a bit of a technical book, but it was very well received, um, versus some other books which I thought, oh, people will really like this. And like, for example, the Palestine Laboratory, I released that book the week before, and the author mentioned it, quote mentioned it on X. So I had the author of the book mention and endorse my review, and he has his own YouTube channel. I tagged him on YouTube, and it's still around, I don't know, like 800, 900 views, however many it has. 1/10 of the book that I released. And both of those were very recent books. So Anthony Lowenstein's book on the Palestine Laboratory, I think came out in 2022 or 2023, probably 2023. And Jeff Halper's book is not recent. I want to say it's at least 5 years old. But between those two, I couldn't have told you which the audience was going to like more. It just happened. So people liked a book more. And as I learn more about, as I prepare Palestine Bookshelf to launch, trust me that I've been keeping an eye on what has ranked and what hasn't. It doesn't mean that because a video didn't rank in the past that I'm not going to cover it in the future. It just means that as far as priorities go, to get Palestine Bookshelf off to a great start, I'm going to start with the top 4 books from this era of the channel to get it launched, because I think that they will get a lot of attention according to the algorithm, from YouTube, which you have to use the algorithm to your favor to get the message out to more people. That's my goal. Can we say they want the old Ottoman Empire? Oh, to an extent, but remember that the old Ottoman Empire goes towards Greece as well, and there's not really a historic claim of the old Israel, the Kingdom of Israel, to Greece, even to Asia Minor, which is where Turkey is now. So it doesn't mean that they don't have ambitions. Dream big is what the Zionists would say. But no, we couldn't say that they want the old Ottoman Empire. Have you gotten a chance to check out Ilan Pape's new book? Zain, you have to give me time. And part of that is you have to realize I don't want to give any particular bias to any one author. I have already given my biases by reviewing multiple of Benny Morris's books and Ilan Pape's books, but I think part of that is a lot of the work that they've done is foundational. But if you notice, what I've been trying to do is go very wide. I'm trying to give people a very broad menu, a tasting menu of things that they can learn about Palestine, and to give as many authors as possible. And once I feel like I've done that, and I'm probably about 7 more books away from doing that, you will find me going deeper. And so Zain is referring to a new book on the Israel lobby on both sides of the Atlantic, which I think came out 6 months ago or earlier this year. I don't remember exactly when. But I don't want to look like just an Ilan Pape channel. I love Professor Pape. I love the work that he does. I don't agree with everything. When I say I don't agree with that, it's like, let's say 92% I agree with. But I have to cover other authors and other aspects that he doesn't cover, that he doesn't have insight into, and that he recommended. A lot of the books that I've read were books that he referenced, that Betty Morris referenced, that other people referenced. And if someone keeps referencing a book, you have to read it. Some of the books are out of print. Some of the books are very difficult to get. Some I've had to spend extra money to get those books, but I'm trying to go as wide as possible. And you'll see that with some of the selections from Palestine Bookshelf in the coming months. Ron, Belt and Road Initiative, Russia, China, Israel, Iran, and counting. China is building a new canal on the east side of the Sinai. Yes, China is definitely being involved in this. Jamie, I did watched every one. Well, thank you, Jamie. That's very kind. And that just meant that I hope I had the same effect on you that other creators have had on me. Is I got interested in what they were covering and I wanted to watch everything that they did. So I appreciate that. Thank you for going back and watching those old videos. I never have that expectation, but it's very gratifying to hear that someone's done that. All right, I will wait. I would say a couple more minutes and then I'll wrap up. I've already been with you all for a very long time. I know you've got other things that you need to do and I want to be respectful of that. Um, so, like I said, I'll wait a couple more minutes for people to ask questions that they want to ask, and then I will let you all go. Um, Judith, thank you. And Didymus, good evening. Good evening, Didymus. I don't know if you had a chance to watch what we've been talking about, but you can watch it as soon as this is done. Obviously, the replay will be available and people will be able to go back and look. All right, I'll wait one more minute. Excited to see your new channel. Thank you, Ron. I've watched many of your older videos too. Keep up your good work, man. Thank you again. Thank you, Zain. Missed the whole show. Okay, well, don't worry. As soon as this ends, you'll be able to go back and start from the beginning. All right. Well, everybody, thank you for your support. Thank you for taking the time to come and listen today. And if for those of you who are watching after the stream, consider sending a super thanks or other supports. Consider looking at the Palestine Children's Relief Fund, supporting them directly, supporting them indirectly by becoming a Patreon, becoming a member on YouTube, and going over to Palestine Bookshelf and following it on as many platforms as you're going to follow. One of the things I'm going to do over there that I haven't done here because the channel wasn't separated is I'm going to have a Substack. So there's going to be a weekly newsletter that goes out with the videos, which will talk about some things that, as you know, things that you talk about in writing are different from things you talk about in video, are different from things you talk about in audio only. So I'm going to do my best to try to cover different things in the Substack as well. And part of that will be segregated. So some of it will be paid, some of it will be unpaid. So feel free to follow along in those ways that I haven't been able to do since then. Any thoughts on ebook versus physical books? Zane, good question. Let me see if it's behind me. Let me see if I can reach it. So this is The Shallows by Nicholas Carr, and you can see the subtitle, What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains. And this is part of the reinforcement of what you see behind here is I'm a dead tree book person. I'm a physical book person, but part of that is because I tend to outline stuff. I tend to mark stuff up, so part of what you're hearing and seeing is me trying to tie things together through marking things up. And this show gives you the research to explain that the way that we read things digitally, it just doesn't get stored in the same way in our brains as physical books do. That's just research, that's just facts. You don't have to like it or not like it. Now, what that implies for me is, do I listen to audiobooks? Yes. Do I read some books on my Kindle? Yes. But I tend to be selective about those. They tend to be more entertainment as opposed to, let's say, serious books that I want to mark up. If it's a serious book that I want to mark up, I'm going to buy the physical copy. If it's something entertaining that I want to simply enjoy, let's say like a book like Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton, which I still think is an absolutely tremendous book. He's a really underappreciated writer, Michael Crichton. He's able to write convincingly about technology, but still have narrative urgency in a novel and have characters that are real characters. They're not just cardboard cutouts of good guy, villain, bad guy, love interest. So Jurassic Park, that's an example of a book I might mark up if I had the Dead Tree version, but I really enjoy listening to. So I'm selective about the format of the book based on the material. So I do listen to audiobooks. I do have books on my Kindle, but the majority, let's say 85% of my book consumption, my reading comes from Dead Tree books. And this is not a long book, The Shallows by Nicholas Carr. And I'll try to put a link to it in the live stream later. But it shows the research about why it's difficult for our brain to treat digital content the same as written content. It's just there. There's a great saying, you should sit in nature for 10 minutes a day. Unless you're busy, then you should sit for an hour. Yeah, there's a relationship to that. I think it was St. Francis de Sales who said you should pray at least 30 minutes a day. And if you don't have time, you should pray at least an hour. So that same idea of, it's the things that you say you don't have time for. Going back to that frame, is it a priority for me? Reframe and say, It's not a priority for me to sit in nature. How does that sit with you? Do you like that? If you like it, then fine. And if you don't like it, make a change. But that's entirely up to you. Um, we can replace it in nature with anything. We are too busy for anything is meaningful. Yep, exactly, Elvis. I totally agree. Great way to frame it. And thank you for sharing that. All right, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to join the stream. Please go over to Palestine Bookshelf on every channel you can think of: YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Telegram. Um, is that everything? LinkedIn. I even have stuff on LinkedIn. I am invading LinkedIn for Palestine. But we are going to get the word out to people who are interested. And all we can do is give information. Remember, we can't control the outcome. All we can control is the input. So let's get the information out there to people and let them do with it what they will. We can't control what they do, but we can control what we do. And so I want to encourage you to do that. And that also removes this idea of despair as if you are in control of the outcome. Don't worry about that. Worry about what you're responsible for, which is the input. What am I doing? What am I sharing? What am I giving? And try to do this. Remember, if you're representing the Palestinian cause, you need to do so in a way that would do credit to the Palestinians, that wouldn't make them ashamed to be associated with you. So be polite. Um, Whenever possible, this is difficult to do with Zionists, but be polite and if necessary, block. You don't have to sit and listen to people's insults and lies. You can block them. It's one of the most wonderful features of social media. Block them and get them out of your life. You don't need to worry about them. There are billions of other people who might be interested. I like your videos. There's a visceral and intellectual approach. Thank you, Ron. I appreciate that. All right, everybody. Thank you for coming on. Please go support Palestine Bookshelf. Please go back if you want to in the comment section. Maybe go back and give me an upvote in the comments. I really liked this video in relation to all the videos you've watched, or a video you thought you weren't going to like that you did. And if you want, potentially go back and look at some of my very old reviews prior to last October and pick one that you might be interested in and leave a comment there and let me know whether you like that book, whether I inspired you to read that book. I still would like for some of you who've come for Palestine, maybe stay for some of the other literature and other ideas that I'm hoping to share as well. So hopefully I can do that in some small way. Since I can't afford real books, that's why I listen to you. All right, Jamie, I'll do my best to help out with that. Hopefully, if potentially if you live in a place that has access to a library, or maybe to friends who have access to libraries, that might be another way to do things. I couldn't afford all these books when I was a kid, and now let's say it's my number one discretionary expense. It's the money, the thing I spend most of my money on. But I understand that not everybody's able to do that. So whatever resources you can, if I can be part of that, I'm happy to do that. Amir, libraries are awesome. I agree, Amir. The reason I don't use libraries that often is because I have to mark up all these books that I work on. So I can't borrow a library book and then mark it up. So I visit a lot of used bookstores and try to find books that way. All right, everybody. Thank you. See you next time.